enclave is a UK base. The historic Royal Air Force Base at Fairford is strategically important for both the United Kingdom and the United States. It reportedly caught fire. A large-scale fire affected the facilities. The major fire at this base was reported. The fire occurred during the early hours of April 26, according to reports, and caused the roof of one of the buildings within the complex to collapse. The authorities recommended that nearby residents close their doors and windows due to the spread of smoke, which indicates that the incident was really serious and widespread. So far, there is no official confirmation about victims, which leaves uncertainty about the damage and possible material losses. There has also been no information on whether any bombers or strategic aircraft stationed at the base were affected, which is crucial for the military role of Fairford Base. According to reports, this base has historically been used by the United States to deploy heavy bombers and support military logistics in international operations such as those in Iran. Hours before the fire, around 200 protesters demonstrated nearby, demanding an end to the United States and Israel's military operations against Iran. The timing of the fire following the protest raises questions about whether the incident was sabotage or just a coincidence. Meanwhile, Iran has reportedly increased regional pressure with drone attacks on the Mufak Sakti base in Jordan, where, by the way, there are US troops, according to the Iranian authorities. The Fairford base, Iran. It would be the key platform for Western air operations, including F-35A, F-15, EF-16, and A-10 aircraft. But on the other hand, Fairford, which is in England, was partially put out of operation. The logistical and strategic capacity of the United States in Europe could be affected during a full military escalation. They say this is a delicate moment, especially considering that the war simply hasn't ended. On the other hand, he is David Rush. It should be remembered that he is a former intelligence officer of the United States Air Force. And now, as a retiree, he is a whistleblower, a witness on the subject of UAPs or unidentified flying objects. He alleges the existence of secret reverse engineering recovery programs for UFOs, claiming that they possess craft of non-human origin. And well, he has served in the Air Force for 14 years. He is a veteran of Afghanistan and worked at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the NGA, and the National Reconnaissance Office. He was a representative in the Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Working Group known as UAPs. He claims that the United States has non-human craft and biological remains recovered since the 1930s. He stated that this reverse engineering program exists without proper congressional oversight. He claims to have suffered professional retaliation after reporting these findings. The Department of Defense has denied his claims, stating that no evidence of reverse engineering programs or possession of extraterrestrial remains was found. That's not in agreement, and well, check out what he says now, claiming that he's speaking directly with Donald Trump's administration. Let's listen to what he says.
Without a doubt, I have advised the administration for the past year or so. And I have spent a lot of time with, high-level officials who work for the president, trying to give them my wise advice about it. And I'll leave it at that to maintain confidentiality around some of my sensitive conversations. But I hope for the best, and I think there is a great expectation that the president will deliver. And I think that if he reveals everything I came into contact with, he will go down in history as a great historical figure, regardless of your political leaning and personal opinion about the president.
In the following video, we are going to see Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, making a series of very harsh statements against, France, against Macron, and maybe against Europe if the position starts to become divided. Look, supposedly Macron had said a series of things that even led to the press accompanying Macron being censored. Because, let's say, he went too far with his comments during France's trip to China to visit Xi Jinping. They say that Macron was basically talking about distancing from the dollar, distancing from the United States, and not getting involved in wars that don't concern them. Marco Rubio is about to speak. We'll listen in a moment. The audio is low, so please turn up your volume. We've turned it up as much as we can without distortion, but it's important you listen to what he'll say. Because in the end, this could be the beginning, now for real, of a division between the United States and Europe, or maybe France, Europe. But honestly, it seems like Macron is increasingly representing European interests, but with the idea of, let's say, distancing himself from the United States. Let's see what Macron thinks, but there are several very interesting comments. Today, we'll analyze them for you. First, let's listen to the comment made by Marco Rubio.
The president of France, Macron, travels to China, spends about 6 hours meeting with Xi Jinping, and then, on the return flight, talks with a group of journalists. And this is what he told the journalists. He told the journalists, first of all, that it's time for Europe to separate from the United States, not to depend on the dollar, not to depend so much on us, and to become its own third superpower. The second thing he says, which I found really interesting, is that Europe must make sure not to get involved in conflicts that are not its own. Specifically, that Europe should not take sides over Taiwan between the United States and China. So I think this is a good moment to ask Europe. Is Macron speaking on behalf of all of Europe? Is Macron now the head of Europe? Is he now the most powerful leader in Europe? If that's the case, things will have to change. Europe, and France specifically, have depended on the United States for their defense for 70 years. In fact, when Macron tried to act like a superpower and send troops to North Africa, he couldn't even move his troops. We had to transport them back and forth ourselves. He couldn't even get his own troops there. So if they're going to break away and follow Macron's leadership, that's going to save us a lot of money. As for not getting involved in other conflicts that aren't ours, we need to ask Europe. Is he speaking on their behalf? Because right now we're pretty involved in Ukraine. We're spending a lot of taxpayer money on a European war. So what? I supported it because I believe it's in the United States' national interest to back our allies. But if the position of our allies, yes, if indeed Macron speaks for all of Europe, and their position now is that they won't take sides between the United States and China over Taiwan, maybe we shouldn't take sides either. Maybe we should basically say we're going to focus on Taiwan and the threats that China poses, and you take care of Ukraine and Europe. So we need to figure out, is Macron speaking for Macron or is Macron speaking for Europe? And we need to get the answer to that pretty quickly because China is very excited about what he said. They enthusiastically support everything he said, and apparently he said even worse things. But the French presidency insisted that all the journalists who got that interview they wanted to review the transcript, and apparently they removed things that were even more aggressive than what he said. So we need to find out what Europe's position is.
¿Cuál es la postura de Europa? Marco Rubio says it's a topic that gets attention, especially thinking about, in a turning point. In which he says, Europe is not ready. France is not ready to defend itself on its own. But on the other hand, France also doesn't want to get involved with the war in Iran, which is having more and more confrontations with the issue of Ukraine and the lack of support from the United States for Ukraine now, in which Europe and especially France have been the ones leading the support for Ukraine right now. So this is clearly a shock right now, but obviously Marco Rubio is going to defend his position. Obviously, Macron is going to defend his own, but it seems that divide or those positions are too opposed to each other, and that could cause some kind of problem. We will be watching to see what other reactions there are. In the meantime, let's move on to another important matter.
States, no matter what happens, act in a very pragmatic way. They don't lose sight of their own interests. Look, we're still supplying nuclear fuel to the United States and nothing happens gladly. You may laugh, but that's how it is. Why? Because it's profitable, and that's fine. They're doing the right thing, and their economy is growing significantly, pretty decently for them. It's not 4.3, yes, but it's still very decent. The main economies of Europe, 3 of them, have practically fallen into recession.
The president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, makes this statement where he clearly talks about the pragmatism they have, so to speak, as powers. And as we say, they look after their interests first and then look at other things. In this case, we have to acknowledge that the nuclear fuel used by nuclear plants in the United States is still being bought from Rosatom, which is a Russian state-owned company. Obviously, this is an issue that, strategically speaking, means they are still dependent on Russia for that matter. Although the United States claims that it will increase the enrichment of certain uranium materials or radioactive materials for the plants, for now, they are not doing it. Meanwhile, Russia is experiencing Ukrainian attacks at night on the Yaroslavl oil refinery, almost 800 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. According to reports, the annual capacity is 15 million tons with a daily capacity of 300,000 barrels and a total oil refining capacity of 4.6. Well, the thing is that they're trying to hit these refineries, and that's something that keeps happening practically every day. Meanwhile, this move by President Zelensky during the press conference with the president of Azerbaijan also draws attention. The Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev. President Zelensky and the president of Azerbaijan have signed 6 cooperation documents, including in the field of security. According to Ukraine, it wants to increase its trade volume with Azerbaijan, and well, these are part of the moves being made between these two countries. What happened in Istanbul is a huge issue because let's see. Speaking of Russian press, Zelensky, what do you think about the plans? Chatting, having your coffee, eating something, and suddenly this happens. Let's go. He started hearing a vibration, the kind of low-end rumble you get when someone has the volume turned way up, especially the bass. So, well, that vibration was mistaken by some diners who thought it was an earthquake, and people started running, and other people who didn't even understand what was happening also ran just in case, you know? The point is that everyone ran out, nothing happened. At most, just a scare, that's all, but obviously this image went viral. A person, let's not say who, well, unintentionally gave these people the scare of their lives. Meanwhile, in China, strong winds are being reported. Well, this caused motorcycles and some trees to fall and down some cables, leading to blackouts, which also affected some areas of Beijing. It's, well, a pretty severe windstorm which had already been forecast. In fact, some areas also had, well, some activity in lakes, small ponds, and so on. They saw how, well, the winds were hitting hard in some regions and the air was somewhat cold, according to the reports. In Japan, there was also a magnitude 6.1 earthquake, an earthquake that happened in Sapporo, in the northern part of Japan, right? In this area, the earthquake would have been here. It was felt, but luckily it was very deep, 80 kilometers deep, a 6.1 earthquake that did not trigger a tsunami warning since it was inland, and at 81 kilometers deep, according to the reports. Meanwhile, well, turning to Syria, a dam that we're seeing there on the screen, well, part of it collapsed, right? Local reports indicate that the Al-Shaya Earth Dam in the south of Aleppo, Syria, has released large volumes of water into the nearby fields due to this break. And right there, well, they're trying to lay a line to start building a kind of fort, a dike, something like that, to stop a situation that, according to what they say, will cost them a lot. There isn't a budget to be able to reverse the situation, and unfortunately, the crops are at risk. The attempt to contain the flow has been desperate, even by local residents who are trying to do whatever they can, but so far the efforts haven't worked, as they warn. And interesting things are also happening in Iran. We'll get into the details in a moment, but the Sultan of Oman, just think about that, reportedly received the Iranian Minister of Foreign Affairs at his palace in Al-Barak, where they discussed diplomatic matters according to reports. When it comes to the conflict, the Gulf is talking to Tehran, not to Washington, not to London. They say this meeting in Muscat is a bridge between Iran and the Gulf countries. Meanwhile, the United States is bombing or trying to impose sanctions and so on and so on. Well, it hasn't been able to understand the strategy of the Iranians, who are forming an alliance with Russia or strengthening the alliance with Pakistan, which seems closer and closer. Pakistan and also, well, towards the Gulf countries, trying, well, to reverse or turn around, let's say, this whole situation. But at the same time, that's what's happening externally. Internally, the military is what's starting to solidify more and more. So, well, what's going to happen? That's the big question for the coming weeks. What do you think the conflict will look like in 1 or 2 months? I think that if the conflict continues, if it stays closed, then obviously this is going to last a long time. It will depend a lot on how Marco Rubio, Whitcomb, and Trump understand this whole situation and what strategies or objectives they are going to pursue, because obviously up to now, nothing is clear. Meanwhile, in Mexico, look at what's happening right now. It is reported that after a private meeting with President Claudia Sheinbaum, Volker Turk, let's remember, the UN High Commissioner, he is or was in a meeting without offering any comments to the press to address, obviously, the issue of the disappeared. So, well, there you have it. Well, an important move by the UN, by Mexico to address this. Let's hope this time this problem is handled well. Let's hope. There's still a lot to do in that area. Meanwhile, back in Japan, take a look at what's happening. It is reported that Japan received around 90,000 barrels of American crude oil shipped from Texas through the Panama Canal. This is an important move to try to balance the energy issue a bit and avoid running out of reserves for that Asian country. Obviously, it's also an important issue. Let's move on to other matters in just a moment. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your comments. If you want to support us, you can do so via Super Chat, membership, subscribing, or giving us a like. All of that helps the channel a lot. Thank you for supporting us. We'll move on to another topic in just a moment.